In this video, I'm going to be going over the best GoPro filming settings for FPV. This video will cover every single GoPro model, even including the new GoPro Hero 12. If you just came for the settings, I'm not going to force you to wait, so here you go. Feel free to screenshot that if you want, but if you want to actually understand what each setting is and why you should be using it, as well as any cases where you should change those settings, I'm going to be spending the rest of the video doing that. Let's do it. Cue cinematic sequence now. Before we get onto the video, I have to sincerely apologize for something. In my last video, I promised to have a cute baby elephant at the end, and I was leaving on a trip and everything was super crazy rush, and I forgot to put a cute baby elephant at the end. Some of you guys were very, very upset. If you're one of those people, I know there's nothing I can ever do to make it up to you, but at the end of this video, I will have 7 cute baby elephants to try to make up for it. By far the biggest thing you can do to get cinematic FPV footage is hit the like button down below. No, but seriously, it honestly helps me out so much with the channel, so I really, really appreciate it. I already made a general GoPro Hero 12 settings video, but I wanted to focus in on FPV in this one. And I'm gonna be showing you guys on the Hero 12, but like I said, this works for any GoPro model, so all of the settings, or most of the settings, are the exact same. They might be in slightly different places, so you just kind of have to find them, but the GoPro menus are super intuitive, so it should be easy. First up is resolution and aspect ratio. Basically, the higher the resolution, the more data there is in your video. Here's a chart that shows the difference. 5.3K doesn't sound like much better than 4K, but it actually has 4 times the resolution. You'll notice with each resolution is a couple different options for aspect ratios, or vice versa. That's because with different resolutions, you get different aspect ratios. Aspect ratio is basically the shape of your video. Not sure if that's technically correct phrasing, but it sounds right. Most video displayed on your phone is either 16:9 or 9:16 if you are watching it vertically. Different GoPros shoot in varying different aspect ratios, so I always shoot on the widest possible one. That way I'm not missing any data and I can always crop in and post. Both the GoPro Hero 11 and the Hero 12 shoot at 8:7, which is amazing because it's basically a square video. So if you want to export it horizontally, you can, or if you want to export it vertically, you can as well. So the aspect ratio and resolution that I normally shoot at is 5.3K 8:7. And if you're on another GoPro, I just recommend using the widest one possible with the highest resolution. Next is frame rate, which controls how many frames per second your video is. The human eye sees life right around 24 frames per second. That's why Hollywood movies are usually exported around 24 frames per second. On our phones and most platforms on the internet are at 30, so that's what I stick to. The higher the frame rate you shoot, the more you can slow the video down. For example, if you're shooting video at 60 frames per second, you can now turn that 1 second of footage shot at 60 frames per second into 2 seconds, and that's where you get slow motion. So the higher the frames per second, the slower your video can be. Different GoPros shoot at different frames per second, but the Hero 12 shoots at 240 frames per second, which is insanely slow. Most of the time, as opposed to shooting slow motion, I stick to 30 frames per second because it gives you a really nice motion blur, especially when you're flying fast. But if I am shooting action sports or something where it would be nice to slow it down, like base jumping or a race car or something like that, I will slow it down to either 60 frames per second or 4K 120 on the Hero 12. 4K 60 is also super solid if your GoPro does not go to 120 or 240. Next up, we have lens, which isn't an actual lens, but more of a digital lens. Super view and hyper view are super wide, whereas linear and linear plus are more narrow but offer better stabilization. I always shoot in wide because that's the default for 8:7. Next up, we have hyper smooth, which is GoPro's internal stabilization software, if you will. So it does all the work for you. You don't have to do any post-processing to stabilize. The video that you get is already stabilized. But if you're flying FPV and you want the best stabilization possible, you're gonna want to use an aftermarket stabilization software called RealSteady, which is much better than hypersmooth. In the past, you had to turn hypersmooth off in order to use RealSteady. Recently, that changed, so you can actually shoot with hypersmooth and then RealSteady it afterwards, which is awesome, just in case you're not sure if you want to use RealSteady. But if you know you're going to use it, I'd recommend turning it off just so you get the widest possible image. Another setting is bitrate, which is basically how many bits per second your video contains. Higher is always better. For some reason, I don't know why GoPros usually preset it as either low or medium, but you're going to want to change that to high. In most GoPros, GoPros, it's in the main settings page, but with the Hero 12, you're gonna have to go to preferences to change it. Next is shutter speed, which is basically how many times per second your shutter is opening and closing. As a rule of thumb, you always want this to be double your frame rate. So if you're shooting 30 frames per second, you want this to be 1/60. If you try this, you'll notice in some brighter lighting situations, the video is completely blown out. So what you're gonna need is an ND filter to compensate. This is the normal GoPro filter. This is an ND filter, and basically what it does is it just darkens the image so you can use the proper frame rate. I use freewell filters on all my drones and I really love them, although recently I have been testing out a Sandmark variable ND filter that is kind of interesting, but for now I would recommend freewell. EV comp, you can keep the same. But then when it comes to ISO, I usually go minimum 100, max 400. If you don't know what ISO is, it's basically just the camera manually compensating to try to get the proper exposure. And ISO is basically like pepper. A little bit on your steak tastes amazing, but too much pepper on your steak and it'll make you want to vomit. If your ISO gets too high, it just gives you this super grainy, poopy, gross look that you definitely do not want. And locking it off at 400 prevents that. A lot of people fly with fixed ISO, but I like to give it a little bit of a range because a lot of times the shoots that I'm doing have varying lighting conditions. For example, if I'm doing a fly through of a building, it's pretty dark inside, and then when I come outside, it's obviously much brighter. So I like to give it a little bit of a range so it can adjust. The GoPro, honestly, when it's adjusting, it looks really smooth and you barely notice it. White balance, I usually just keep on auto because I find GoPro does a really good job of it 99% of the time. For sharpness, you're gonna wanna make sure you're on low for that. You can always add in sharpness later, but you can never take it away. Lastly, we get to color profile, which is basically how the video displays. GoPros shoot in a wide range of color profiles from normal to flat to now with the Hero 12 HDR and Log. But before the Hero 12, I always just shot on normal color profile. I always get a lot of hate for this because people are like, you gotta shoot flat because it matches log profiles. But I found every single time that I shot flat, I didn't get any added dynamic range and I was just adding the color back that it takes away in post. Now that the GoPro shoots a real log profile, that's definitely different, but before it was just desaturating. So personally, I just stick with the normal color profile on any GoPro other than the Hero 12. But if you are on the 12, HDR and Log are a massive update. Both are designed to give you better dynamic range in your image, which basically means the sky isn't too bright and the dark parts of your image aren't too dark. When you shoot in Log, it gives you a super desaturated flat image that you then have to go in post and just color correct back to exactly where you want it. And on the other hand, HDR does that all in camera. I was honestly super freaking excited about a log profile finally from GoPro, but after using it for this past month, it's honestly just not that good. It's super noisy in the shadows and honestly is just super frustrating to grade. Hopefully GoPro will fix this in the future with software, but for now, I just wouldn't use it. So I started using HDR and I honestly like that much better. Hey guys, that's about it for this video. I don't have a sponsor for today's video, so I want to take a second just to plug the FPV merch that I've been working on. This is one of my favorite hoodies. I have t-shirts and hoodies, and all of them just have this super simple FPV goggle logo on the front, and then the hoodies have FPV Army on the sleeve. I have a bunch of different color options and styles on the website. So if you've ever wanted to support me or support the channel, I'll leave a link down in the description for that merch. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know there's a crap load of videos out there, so I really appreciate you watching mine. If you like this video, I know you're gonna really like this FPV drone video that I made in Iceland of a volcano, but that's it. See you guys on the next one. Peace.